Have you ever been absolutely, well, paralyzed by an idea? Or maybe the lack of one?
Uh-huh.
You're staring at that blank fabric, just willing inspiration to strike.
Or maybe worse, you're trying to recreate that gorgeous, intricate textile piece you saw online.
Oh, yeah. The one with the stitching you couldn't even see and those, like, breathtaking sunset color gradients.
Exactly. It's this constant tension in craft, isn't it?
Yes.
You have the materials, you might even know the basic technique.
Right.
But when you actually try to make the piece, it just feels, well, flat.
It looks like a good copy, maybe, technically okay, but it lacks that depth, that genuine conviction the original had.
That's it, that conviction.
Okay, so let's try and unpack this a little bit. What we realize when that happens, I think, is that the basic technique wasn't the secret sauce.
Yeah.
The secret was the information the original artist was working with, the choices they made based on something deeper. We had the fabric, the thread, but we missed the harder-won knowledge behind it all.
Absolutely. And that's really what this deep dive is all about. It's for you, the learner, who wants to move beyond just, like, reproducing patterns.
Yeah, leaving past copying.
Right. To creating truly informed, maybe even soulful craft ideas.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about this whole universe of knowledge that fuels a great textile piece.
Like what specifically?
Well, how materials actually behave, not just how the book says they should. The cultural context of colors, why certain techniques evolved the way they did.
And what story you're genuinely trying to tell with your own piece.
Exactly. And if you don't understand where your information is coming from, you are, well, fundamentally limited in what you can create. It really matters.
Okay, so before we get into defining those sources of information, we kind of have to tackle the messy bit first, right? The whole ethics of generating ideas.
It's a minefield sometimes.
We need to get clear on the difference between, say, a helpful spark of an idea and just outright appropriation. Because that's key if you want to avoid making work that feels, well, derivative, soulless even.
It's crucial. We need to think about it like a spectrum. So first, there's inspiration. That's the spark.
Right.
It just opens a door in your mind. You see, maybe an 18th century crazy quilt, all that chaotic beauty.
Okay.
And it makes you think not about replicating that exact quilt, but maybe about using contrast or tension or embracing a kind of beautiful disorder in your own work. It sets you off on a path.
Okay, so inspiration is the jumping off point. Then there's information gathering.
Yeah, this is more technical. It's necessary practical research.
Like figuring out the right needle size for a specific silk thread.
Exactly. Or studying the precise steps you need to execute, say, a perfect Kutchwork chain stitch.
Yeah.
You're building your toolkit, your technical know-how.
Got it. And then the third point on the spectrum, copying.
And this is where it gets really specific. Copying is when you reproduce someone else's unique creative choices, their actual design decisions.
Just like if a maker designed a really distinctive asymmetrical lavender sprig pattern and I use that exact composition, the same arrangement, maybe I just change the shade of green in the leaves slightly.
Then you're copying their unique design effort. You're taking the creative solution they came up with.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting, I think, because, a lot of people scroll online for inspiration, find a pattern or a look they like, and just start stitching. They think they're being inspired.
Right. But what if the inspiration is the entire unique discovery? The core creative idea itself.
Explain that more.
Let's go back to that idea of a geometric quilt. Imagine a maker spent, weeks developing a really specific arrangement of hexagons and squares.
Okay.
And this specific arrangement creates this mind-bending optical illusion, like 3D cubes floating in space. That structural pattern itself is their creative discovery. It's the solution to a design problem they posed and solved.
Right. So if I just come along and say, oh, I love that cube effect, and I use the exact same underlying geometry, the same shapes and the same relationship, but maybe I just swap out their bright fabrics for my muted ones.
Then you're essentially taking their intellectual breakthrough, their solution.
I'm copying the core discovery.
Exactly. The original maker solved that complex design puzzle. To just reuse that specific solution without going through your own exploration, your own problem solving.
Yeah.
That's copying.
Okay.
A truly inspired approach, following our spectrum, would be different. You'd learn the principle, optical illusions in geometry, interesting.
Right.
You might research different tessellations, play with shapes, maybe triangles or diamonds, and develop your own entirely unique pattern that achieves a similar kind of effect, but through your own shapes and proportions. You wrestled with the problem yourself.
But hang on, isn't that Well, kind of inefficient. Why should the average crafter spend maybe weeks, wrestling with geometry when there's a pattern right there that gives them the answer in 10 minutes?
Because the wrestling is where your unique voice comes from. That struggle, that exploration, that's where you find your solutions. If you skip that, your work is essentially just following directions. It might look nice, but does it have your imprint?
Good point.
And this ethical line is not just abstract. We see it play out when big brands take traditional, culturally rich designs. Think about the whole Kolhapuri Chapal controversy.
Ah, yes. With Prada, wasn't it?
Right. They took a design deeply embedded in a specific culture with generations of primary cultural knowledge baked into its form and just rebranded it for profit without acknowledgement, without compensation.
They took the discovery and stripped its context, its source.
Oh, precisely. Which brings us back to why acknowledging sources matters. It's not just about avoiding legal trouble, although that's part of it. It's about artistic integrity and context.
So being honest about where your ideas come from actually makes the work stronger.
Absolutely. When you can say something like, this piece was informed by the geometric principles I learned studying Islamic tiling patterns, and I combine that with the kind of color palettes you see in 1950s abstract expressionism, you're doing something powerful.
How so?
You're situating your work. You're placing it within a larger conversation across time and cultures. It shows you understand the history that led to your design, and that clarity, that honesty. It actually strengthens the value of your own unique contribution. It shows respect for the knowledge you're building on.
Okay, so to make that truly authentic work, the kind that has our voice in it, we need to be really conscious of where we're getting our information.
Yes, and our sources define the world of knowledge as resting on two crucial pillars. You really need to understand and master both if you want depth in your craft.
Two pillars. Okay, what's the first one?
The first pillar is the primary source. Think of this as the direct encounter.
Direct encounter, meaning?
Meaning it's first-hand information, raw data, stuff you encounter yourself without anyone else's interpretation or organizational filter slapped on top.
And what's really fascinating here, reading through the material, is how much of this primary information is sensory. It's often nonverbal, right? It lives in the material itself or in the experience.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Let's look at maybe 4 crucial primary source examples for you, the listener, to think about.
Okay.
First, examining actual historical textiles. And I mean actual textiles, not just a photograph in a book.
Right. Getting up close.
Yeah. Standing in a museum, maybe leaning really close to an 18th century quilt. You notice the stitching isn't machine perfect. You can actually see the slight unevenness, the rhythm of the maker's hand.
You see the human element.
Totally. And you might observe how certain natural dyes, like indigo, held their color incredibly well for 2 centuries, while maybe the cochineal reds have faded to just a whisper. That information, the evidence of how materials age, the touch of a human hand, you don't get that same richness from a flat photo.
Okay, that makes sense. So wait a minute. Are you saying that the time I spend just messing up, like noticing the dye totally bled on my quilt sample, or that horrible feeling when the silk thread shredded because I used it on rough canvas, that failure actually becomes a valuable primary source?
Absolutely. It's incredibly valuable, which leads directly to our next key primary source. Hands-on experimentation.
Ah, the trial and error.
Exactly. You sit at your work table. Maybe you're trying to get a specific graduated color effect with embroidery thread. You make 10 little samples, trying long and short stitch, maybe mixing different numbers of thread strands, varying the tension.
You're learning by doing.
Yes. The knowledge of how that specific thread looks when it's pulled tight versus when it lies loose, or how those particular colors actually blend in reality, not just in theory, that is knowledge generated by your body, by your hands, through direct experience. That's primary.
Okay, got it. What's the third type?
The third primary source is something maybe we take for granted, direct observation of the world around us.
Like just looking.
Just looking, but looking intentionally. Instead of relying only on a color palette guide in a book, maybe you go for a walk after it rains, and you really notice how the wet leaves on the pavement overlap, creating these complex shadowed shapes. You see how the colors of the autumn ground are suddenly so much more intense, saturated by the moisture.
Ah, so you're taking that visual data directly.
Yes. That direct, unmediated visual information becomes the foundation for maybe layered applique designs or complex color choices in dyeing or weaving. You're translating the world, not just translating someone else's drawing of the world.
That's a powerful distinction. And the final primary source.
This one's crucial. especially for traditional crafts, conversations with other makers, especially experienced ones.
Talking to people.
Yes. Sitting down with, say, an elderly, experienced embroiderer, asking her why she arranges those little shisha mirrors in Kutch work in that specific way, not just how.
And she might tell you something about tradition or superstition or just what feels right in her hands.
Exactly. You're accessing embodied knowledge, cultural knowledge, practical wisdom that might never have been written down neatly in a textbook. It lives in her practice, in her body. That's pure primary information.
Okay, so those are primary sources, direct, raw, experienced. Now let's contrast that with the second pillar.
Right. The second pillar is secondary sources. This is the filtered view.
Filtered how?
This is the information you get that has already been processed, interpreted, organized, and then delivered to you by someone else.
So this is the stuff we probably rely on most often, day to day. Books, websites.
Definitely. And it's incredibly useful, essential even. But we just have to remember that filter is always there. Someone else made choices about what to include, how to present it.
Okay, give us some examples.
Well, think of a comprehensive applique technique guidebook. It might give you 10 different techniques, neatly categorized, step by step.
Super helpful.
Totally helpful. But remember, the author decided those 10 were the most important, or the most common, and they structured the learning path. So you're learning efficiently, yes, but you're learning through their lens, their logic.
Okay, what about videos? Online tutorials are huge now.
Great example. They are usually very polished, right? The demonstrator has probably edited out all their little mistakes, the practice attempts that didn't quite work, maybe the moments the camera angle was awkward or the lighting wasn't right.
You see the perfect end result.
Exactly. You see a smooth, perfect execution of the final technique, which is helpful for learning how to do it, for sure. But it hides the often messy, frustrating, primary process of learning and discovery that they went through.
Yeah, you don't see the 10 failed samples.
You don't. And then, of course, there are photographs of finished work, especially on platforms like Instagram or Pinterest.
Oh yeah, the endless scroll.
Right. You're seeing the final image, and it's almost always filtered and optimized. Colors might be boosted, lines sharpened.
Texture is gone.
Texture, scale, weight, all those crucial embodied characteristics of a real textile object. They're often lost or completely distorted in a flat photo. You're seeing the presentation of the work, not the object itself.
That's a really key difference in the last secondary source example.
Published patterns. These are kind of the ultimate secondary source, in a way.
How so?
Because nearly all the critical creative decisions, the color placement, the specific stitches to use, the overall composition, the proportions, they've already been decided for you by the pattern designer. You're essentially outsourcing the creative heavy lifting.
Okay, so we have primary sources, the direct stuff, the messy stuff, the experienced stuff, and secondary sources, the filtered, organized, prepackaged stuff.
Exactly. And here's the paradox, or maybe just the reality. You absolutely need both. You can't really thrive with just one.
Why's that?
Well, secondary sources give you breadth. They provide the organized context, the technical vocabulary, the history, the efficient learning path.
They get you started, give you the map.
Right. But primary sources give you depth. They give you that authentic, gut-level understanding, the personal conviction, and crucially, that embodied knowledge, the stuff that lives in your hands, not just your head.
So if I rely only on secondary sources, say I just follow tutorials and patterns perfectly,
Then you might produce technically proficient work. Sure, it might look clean and accurate, but it often feels, well, generic, a bit soulless, purely derivative, because the core creative decisions weren't really yours. You executed the instructions well, but you don't necessarily know why that stitch developed historically, or how your specific thread actually behaves under tension in your hands.
Okay, I see that. And the flip side, what if I ignore all of the books and tutorials and just rely on my own observations and experiments?
Well, relying solely on your own primary observations without any secondary context can lead to work that feels maybe naive.
Naive how?
You might end up accidentally reinventing a technique that people have been using for centuries because you didn't do the background reading. Or, more seriously, you could unknowingly misuse culturally significant symbols or motifs because you didn't consult a secondary source that explained their meaning and importance. You lack the context.
Right, you might stumble into tricky territory without realizing it.
Exactly. So the real magic, the sweet spot, is in the synthesis. It's about using both knowledge streams together, letting them inform each other at every step of the process.
Okay, can we walk through an example of how that might work? Let's take a conceptual theme. Maybe creating a textile piece about finding light in dark times. How would primary and secondary sources work together there.
Great theme.
Hmm.
Okay, so the secondary contribution might kick things off. You start gathering context and ideas, maybe you read some poetry, you stumble upon that Leonard Cohen line, there's a crack in everything, that's how the light gets in.
Ah, okay, that gives you a metaphor.
Exactly. It inspires you to think about fractured forms, broken surfaces, sudden illumination breaking through. Then maybe you do some research secondary source again into the symbolism of gold thread in different religious traditions, or how light is depicted in historical tapestries.
So you're building a conceptual framework from interpreted sources.
Yes, but then you need to ground it in reality.
Hmm.
Make it yours. That's where the primary contribution comes in.
Stepping away from the books.
Right. You step away from the screen and the books, and you just observe light directly. Maybe you go for a walk at dusk. You really look at how a single weak street lamp creates this distinct pool of warm yellow light against the deep, almost unforgiving blue of the evening shadows.
You're gathering raw visual data.
Precisely. Or maybe you take some scraps of thin, transparent silk and hold them up to the window, just experimenting, seeing how the fabric catches, diffuses, and redirects the natural light. You make little stitch samples trying to capture that effect.
So you're testing materials and observing phenomena yourself.
Yes. And now, the resulting piece starts to come together, grounded in both theory and lived reality. Maybe you choose a base fabric of dark charcoal linen, something you decided on based on your primary material tests for how it absorbs light.
Oh, okay.
And you layer it with fragments of yellow silk, the specific shade chosen because of your direct observation of those street lamps at dusk. And perhaps the stitching radiates outwards from those silk fragments, drawing its metaphorical shape from the poem, but its energy from your experiments.
So the work becomes specific, it's genuine, it carries your personal conviction because it came from both structured learning and direct experience. It's not just a generic representation of light.
Exactly. It's your interpretation, informed and grounded.
And thinking about sources,
Yeah.
we shouldn't limit ourselves just to textile knowledge.
Absolutely not. We need to cast a much wider net.
Yeah.
If your piece is about, say, resilience,
Yeah.
don't just research durable fabrics, although that's useful primary knowledge. Look at film.
Yeah.
How do directors use color grading, shifting tones toward cool blues or warm golds to convey emotional states like despair or hope? That's secondary information you can translate.
Or literature.
Sure. How does Maya Angelou build that incredible sense of rising momentum in her poem Still I Rise? Could you translate that feeling of upward movement into repeated rising forms or stitch patterns in your design?
Looking at rhythm and structure in writing as inspiration for textile form.
Or look at nature, another primary source. How do trees survive fierce storms? Often by bending, by being flexible, not just rigidly strong. Could that inform your choice of materials or structure? The information is everywhere, but it only really becomes knowledge for your craft when you process it, filter it, and translate it through your own primary experience and making process. That wide net ensures your work isn't just technically sound, but conceptually rich and layered.
So wrapping this up, what does this all really mean for us as makers? It feels like truly great craft ideas aren't these mysterious lightning strikes that just hit a lucky few.
Not at all. They come from something much more deliberate, more active. They emerge from that intersection of organized knowledge, direct personal experience, and really clear artistic intent. Knowing what you want to say and knowing how to gather the right kinds of information to say it effectively.
And this raises an important question, I think. The most powerful textile work, the pieces that feel really fresh but also deeply grounded, they often emerge when you do both things deeply. You take technical instruction from a secondary source. Maybe you study a historical stitching manual meticulously.
Right, line the rules.
But then you don't just stop there. You spend weeks, months, maybe even years practicing that technique, experimenting with it, until it truly lives in your hands, until it becomes embodied, primary knowledge for you.
That commitment, that process of internalizing the instruction and making it your own through practice, that's often what separates the people who just follow directions from the true creators. It's about transformation of knowledge.
It makes me think about the powerful legacy of things like patchwork quilts, especially the historical ones. They weren't just objects, were they? They were communication.
Absolutely. Many weren't only technically complex. They deliberately incorporated specific family fabrics, scraps of clothing worn by loved ones. They were acting as memory keepers, creating continuity across generations.
Their deep meaning came directly from the information gathering the primary source of the fabrics themselves, serving a very clear intent.
Exactly. They understood what they were trying to say with those quilts. You are connected to this history, to these people, to this story. Your information sources, both primary and secondary, need to serve your deeper intent. What story are you trying to tell?
So the best craft, perhaps, is where tradition often learned from secondary sources, but validated through practice meets your own innovation, born from primary experience and observation.
Well said. And it's where your hands ultimately translate everything you've learned, everything you've seen and felt, both from the books and from life itself, into something unique, something only you could have made.
So the final thought for you, our listener, is this. Go gather your knowledge. Seek out both the wisdom in books and the wisdom in the world around you, in your materials, in your own hands. Combine them, and then go create something that truly matters, something that speaks with your authentic voice.